Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you a 10-minute portrait sketch in real time, and I'm going to watch it with you and talk through my thought process and try to point out some of the things that I look for or find important in a relatively quick portrait sketch. Okay, so here at the beginning I'm going to loosely start working out a super simplified generic head shape. And I'm also going to suggest just the most basic geometry, just the center line, an indication of the side plane, or the edge of that major shadow mass, and the eye line. And the eye line at this stage is really there as much to establish the angle as it is for the position. And all of this together should give me a good idea of the head tilt. And from here, I'm going to start making indications of positions of things, the major features and the larger shadow masses for the most part. And you can kind of think of this as putting down landmarks that I can compare with other landmarks to begin to organize the face. In a quicker sketch like this, I'm probably not going to be doing a lot of measuring, so I'm going to be working less geometrically and more visually as it starts to take shape. But because I'm just taking guesses, I want all of these initial ideas to be really loose. And as you can see, these indications are just scribbles at this point. They're just little blobs of value that are editable and are easy for me to move around. So now I'm starting to work out this complex area of the eyes and the brow line. And the primary thing I'm looking for here is the glabella. And the glabella is something I always look for. Very important shape. If you can get the shape and the position of the glabella right, it's easier to get all the shapes around it right. So that's one of the first landmarks that I want to try and get fairly close so I can begin to use it as an anchor. A lot of this initial construction is worth spending some time on and getting close before moving on, and I probably would in a longer effort, but today I'm just kind of zipping through it. But that in itself can impart a certain energy to the drawing. And when I'm sketching in the mouth here, I'm just going to suggest where the corners might be and indicate the center of the upper and lower lip and move on. Developing the mouth anymore at this point is probably a waste of time, because for me anyway, that seems to be the feature that wants to wander the most. So I don't want to commit to it just yet, but it's important to take a stab at it and to keep skipping around to quickly try and get the whole head laid out, because it's not until I've gotten all of my guesses sketched in that I can start making better decisions. Okay, let's see. I'm working out the chin and the angle of the jaw. That edge will almost completely disappear eventually, but I want to draw it in to help me to see the form. And apparently it looks like I'm okay with where I've placed the mouth, because I'm going back now to connect the dots and flesh out the lips a bit. But then again, I want to move on, not get bogged down, and continue to think about the big picture. And let's see, I'm thinking about that major shadow mass there, and this is the first place I really brought value into it. I like to get values working early. I feel like I make much better visual decisions when I've gotten at least the simple light and dark areas established. And here I'm suggesting the outer edges, which is mostly hair, and these edges aren't important, so I'm going to spend very little time on them. I want to sketch them in again to help me see the form better, but ultimately I know they're going to be either soft or very nondescript. And this reference, she has kind of a tall forehead. I've got it a little bit too tall, so I'm going to nudge that down a little bit. All right, so at this point I'm going to get serious and grab a bigger chunk of charcoal. This is just a piece broken off of a thicker stick, and I'm holding it on its side. It's exactly the same stuff though. This is Willow charcoal that I'm using. I don't want to get too much into the medium for this video, but if you're curious about drawing with charcoal, I have a different video on the subject and I will link it in the description. I like this method of laying in the shadows and darker areas, especially in a quicker sketch like this, simply because it's an efficient way to apply a lot of medium. But I also think that the bold strokes bring a lot of life and motion to the sketch as well. And I'm going to use this for most of the bigger shadow masses and the darker value areas. And I think I go back, and now I go back to the thinner stick and continue to develop the values on her face. And here I'm just adding some values into the lighter areas. I'm right-handed, so it's kind of an awkward angle for me, but I'm trying to apply this across her face horizontally. And then I'm going to blur these lighter areas some with my finger, just to take away a little bit of the noise. I don't want to lose all of it, I just want to quiet it down a little. The idea with this process really is to have some value in these light areas to pull your highlights out of. At this point, I'm realizing that I need to get control of my values. Now that I've put down all of these dense, dark areas, everything that's less rich and dark by comparison is going to have much, much less impact. And my initial sketch of the face has all but disappeared, so I need to reassert the features while taking advantage of the vague quality of it at this stage to make adjustments to my drawing errors. And it's not really redrawing what I've already drawn. It's more like reinforcing what I think is right and moving or de-emphasizing what isn't. I just love this kind of loose, rough sketching, and I think that a timed study encourages that kind of a loose technique. I personally think that timed drawings are an extremely valuable exercise for an artist, but I also think they're often misunderstood. First of all, no one really cares how long you spent on a drawing, honestly, except for maybe other artists. It's not a race, and speed isn't a measure of quality. But there are a couple of things that drawing with a time limit does for you. One is that it teaches you what's important and what isn't, what's essential, and what you can more or less ignore. And this is especially true in a very short study of just a minute or two, but the basic idea with drawing with a time limit isn't to draw faster, it's to draw smarter. And the other thing that a timed drawing does for you is that it prevents overworking, or at least gets you to think about it. I mentioned it earlier, but there's an energy to quick sketches that often gets lost as a drawing develops and gets more detailed. Having a hard stopping point gets you to put your pencil down and take a look at it, and likely earlier than you wanted to, but you may notice qualities of that rough sketch that you want to preserve or introduce into a more developed piece. And I spend a fair amount of time on her chin and jawline trying to get the right character to that edge. I notice that I'm not following my reference very closely here, but that's okay. In 10 minutes, I'm not really thinking about a likeness. I'm just shooting for a believable human, and hopefully it vaguely resembles my reference. Reasonable expectations are important, I think. And I'm developing some deeper tone for that side plane, getting that edge to turn and recede. And I guess I'm still not quite happy with her chin and jaw, because I'm going back and tightening up those edges a little bit. I'm trying to stay loose and keep moving across the drawing and try not to get too focused on any one area. This sketch focuses on form over detail, and this reference doesn't have a lot of eye detail, for instance, so I'm not as tempted to force that in, and I can keep that very simple. A little finger painting here and there, pushing edges. And here I'm thinking that I may not have gotten enough value into those lighter areas that I added in earlier. So I'm adding in some charcoal into the nose and forehead because I know I'm about to get into the highlights and I want to give them some punch. And now I'm finally going to use the kneaded eraser and try to bring out some of the highlights. And I'm going to follow the form when I do this and think about the underlying shape. Some of these are flat and describe planes, and some are more like pinpoints. Think about how the highlights work with the shadows to support the form and structure. Highlights are wonderfully descriptive, but if they're misplaced, they can throw everything off and make a portrait feel kind of awkward. I probably could have pushed the value a bit darker in the lighter areas on this, but the video does tend to wash out the light tones some. That's my excuse anyway. And from here, in these last few seconds, I'm done with the charcoal, and I'm looking over the entire drawing and trying to make some final adjustments before I wrap it up. I'm squinting at it, looking for symmetry and structure, and I'm going to try to subtly affect some things using just my finger. Erasing some of my fingerprints, And I'm going to wrap it up with a last-second highlight. And that's my 10-minute portrait. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, please just leave them below, and I will respond if I can. Take care, everyone.